I'm sorry, I think the next one is actually going to be the stigma associated with pelvic floor disorders by Dr. Kaiserman from the University of Michigan. Sorry about that.
Good afternoon. I will be presenting our work on stigma associated with pelvic floor disorders. We have no disclosures. Our primary aim of this study was to quantify the level of stigma in women presenting for urogynecologic care using a validated scale. And our secondary aim was to test our hypothesis that stigma related to pelvic floor disorders would result in a care-seeking delay. To do this, we took a sample of women who presented for new patient visits at our interdisciplinary pelvic floor disorders clinics and had a sample of 523 women in total. All of these women completed anonymous, written, validated surveys before their visit, including the Stigma Scale for Chronic Illnesses 8-item version, or the SSCI-8, and the Pelvic Floor Bother Questionnaire, or PFBQ. As a reference, I've included the SSCI-8, which, as you can see, is a series of 8 questions about stigma that are rated from never to always. This scale is scored from 8 to 40, and it's been validated in a population with chronic neurologic disorders. Those patients tend to have scores in the 12 to 15 range. Now you can see the results from our pelvic floor disorder patients, and their results are actually similar to those in the chronic neurologic disorder population. You can see on the x-axis the presenting complaint, and on the y-axis the stigma score. Here you can see that women presenting with pelvic organ prolapse had overall the lowest stigma scores, and they gradually increased with presenting with urine leakage, constipation, and finally we found the highest stigma scores in those presenting with accidental bowel leakage. We then looked at whether stigma would result in a care-seeking delay, which we defined as greater than or equal to 1 year. And we found that women with a higher stigma score actually did not wait as long to seek care. Some factors that were surprisingly not associated with stigma were having friends or family with similar conditions and the education level. You can see that this is a more educated population than maybe is generalizable, but that was not affected by stigma. We then wanted to model factors associated with a care-seeking delay and did a logistic regression model of waiting 1 year or more. Here we found that presenting with urine leakage increased the odds of having a higher stigma level, and stigma score urine leakage increased the odds of having a care-seeking delay, and having a higher stigma score decreased the odds of having a care-seeking delay. When we looked at the correlation between stigma score and symptom bother, we found a moderately positive correlation between the two, which was significant. So in conclusion, stigma is higher in our patients with accidental bowel leakage and lower overall in those presenting with pelvic organ prolapse. Those having a higher stigma level actually sought care earlier, in contrast to our hypothesis. And increasing stigma is positively correlated with increasing levels of symptom bother. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bernie Harlow from Boston University. Do you think there's an association between stigma and those who actually have, I know that you saw there wasn't a difference between those who waited a year versus those who waited less than a year, but do you think that those who are not in the clinic, who are still out there in the population, differ from those by the different conditions that you're looking at with respect to stigma? And do you think that that might be a limitation in being able to externally validate this kind of finding? Because I'm worried about that.
Yes, absolutely. Those patients likely are different in several ways, those who do not come into care, as opposed to those who do. So that would take a larger community-based study to find those results.
Interesting use of a great questionnaire, and of course we know that the stigma is high for these disorders. How does the stigma for pelvic floor disorders compare to, say, neurologic diseases? So how does it comparable?
So it's actually quite comparable. So the constipation and accidental bowel leakage patients have similar levels of stigma to patients with Parkinson's disease, which is surprising.
So do you think education is key in getting these lower scores?
Absolutely. I think that, thinking of ways that we could decrease the stigma in our patients, education would be my number one thought, and spreading information.
And what would be your choice of education? What mode?
My mode, probably in line with being a millennial, would be using more social media to disseminate the information, and just general kind of public education campaigns, maybe commercials as well.
Totally agree. Thank you.
Thank you.